2024 CA Board of Directors. Please remember that tonight's meeting is being live streamed. You can find the agendas and background materials for this meeting on the CA Board of Directors webpage. Links to these documents can also be found in the description section of our YouTube live stream for those that are watching the meeting there. If you are virtual, please mute your microphones unless speaking. If you're in the room, please ensure that all cell phones are silenced. Raise your hand to speak and I'll record the names in the order which I say them. If you're virtual, please use the chat feature. If you're virtual, also please raise your hand virtually so I can see them. As we move through the meeting, I will introduce each item on the agenda. Before a vote is taken, I will restate a motion as well as who motioned it and seconded. If at any point you have trouble hearing me or any member present, please say so. Tonight's timekeeper is Sky Anderson. I will now call the roll. Sky?
Here.
Dietrich?
Here.
Reg? Karen?
Here.
Chris?
Present.
Alan?
Here.
Dennis?
Here.
Keith?
Here.
Bill?
Here.
Andy?
Here.
And I am here. Announcement of closed meetings, special meetings held or to be held. The Risk Management Committee held a closed meeting on October 26th at 5:58 p.m. at CA headquarters. Committee members present were Susan Krabbe, Dennis Matty, Judge John Kuchno, James Hamilton, Reg Avery, Alan Klein, and Karen Emery. All Risk Committee meetings are closed under Maryland Homeowners Association Act, Maryland Code, Real Property, Section 11B, 11144. Consultation with staff, personnel, consultants, attorneys, board members, or other persons in connection with pending or potential litigation or other legal matters. Therefore, no vote was taken to close. CA's Board of Directors held a closed meeting at CA headquarters on October 30th at 7:01 p.m. Members participating in the meeting were Chair Andrew Stack, Vice Chair Eric Greenberg, Sky Anderson, Reg Avery, Karen Emery, Chris Fuchs, Alan Klein, Dennis Matty, Keith O'Neill, and Bill Santos. The vote to close the meeting was 9-0. Members Anderson, Avery, Emery, Fuchs, Greenberg, Klein, O'Neill, Santos, and Stack. No directors voted against closing the meeting or abstained. The closed meeting was authorized under Maryland Homeowners Association Act, Maryland Code Real Property, Section 11B, 11141, discussion of matters pertaining to employees and personnel, and consultation with legal counsel on legal matters, and consultation with staff, personnel, consultants, attorneys, board members, or other persons in connection with pending or potential litigation or other legal matters, and consideration of terms and conditions of a business transaction in the negotiation stage if the disclosure could adversely affect the economic interests of the homeowners association. May I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda.
Andy moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Andy moves. Karen seconds. Are there any objections to the agenda?
I don't have an objection to the agenda, but aren't we also supposed to state the purpose of the closed meetings besides the part of the act under which we legitimately closed it?
I've read the script as is. I believe that's sufficient.
My understanding of the law.
John, is there anything I missed?
I think it was in the agenda for the.
I can't hear John.
I'm sorry. This work?
Yep.
I don't know whether it was the closed agenda, but I know that discussion was before the meeting as to the purposes of the topics that were considered. So, I mean, it's already been included within the closed agenda minutes. I really don't see the need to repeat it again.
Okay, thanks. So are there any objections? Seeing no objections, the agenda is passed. Next we have Columbia update.
So it was another typical 80-degree Halloween. And hundreds of people showed up at the sports park, and CA was proud once again to host that event. We hosted with partners. There was a book giveaway, lots of fun and games. There was a Monster Mini Challenge this year. It was an incredible event, and it really speaks to the kind of organization that CA is, and it speaks to the, I think I probably had 55 or so staff members there that not only gave away candy, but dressed up. I mean, they engaged with the community. CA, that's who CA is. And, we had a couple other things that we did. We did a hayride at Howard's Glen. We did a Halloween movie night at the lakefront. It was really spooky, hocus pocus. And then we had special skate sessions at the ice rink. Sports Park manager Belinda Bryant really had the most to do with the event, and she speaks to that in this video.
This is the Columbia Association Trunk or Treat event that we do every year for the entire community and beyond. It's just individuals who like to hand out candy and dress up and decorate, and the community really likes doing that. Our partners and organizations we work with so they can provide information to the community. I can't express how important it is that we use both of us to make things work for everybody, and we do. Columbia Association is an organization, but without the community, we wouldn't be that organization. It's like this cohesive bond that works together. Trunk or Treat is just one small piece of what we do, and you see how big this is. It's just a wonderful sense of community to be involved in here. Do I find this work rewarding? If I did it, I would not be here.
I am so very proud of so many team members. It's remarkable. It's the best part of my job. It really, again, speaks to who the Columbia Association is. I have a time-lapse video of a pollinator garden that was done in collaboration with Harper's Choice Cares and some volunteers behind Kaler Hall. CA teamed up with the Howard County Bee City to support the event, with CA providing plants, tools, water, and mulch. And now the Community Operations Division will manage that and maintain that into the future. I'm being cued by my production manager. So next up is that CA is working on an interactive map system that, we have a lot of assets in the open space, and you'll see this system that we're working on, ArcGIS, does incredible things. We have something called a Trimble 650 that we can take out in the open space and point it at something, and it pinpoints it exactly within 2 centimeters onto a map. And it also allows us to do asset management so that we can attach a picture to it, a timeline. We can roll down a pathway and say, okay, this part of the pathway is 5 feet, and now we're moving to 6 feet. So it gives us incredible control over our assets. Ultimately, we want to work it into our work ticket system. We're not there yet, and this is going to take some time, but we have started. And cue my video.
The Land Administration Division ensures CA has the knowledge and tools necessary to be a successful steward of the open space lands we hold in trust. We support this effort by managing and processing requests for access, information, or services related to real property. A major project currently underway in the Land Administration Division is the development of CA's very own interactive map, which can be used as an asset management tool. In the example shown, vital information such as bridge dimensions, ownership, identifiers, and photos are documented to be used as a resource to increase efficiencies within workflows. All of the information gathered can then be used for analysis purposes in order to better manage the open space lands we hold in trust.
What's interesting about the system is you can walk around a bamboo site and you can pinpoint all the corners. You can look at other invasives, which we haven't had that technology in the past. And what's important to also understand, it's not only how many trees you plant. If you don't maintain them and if you don't take control of some invasives, they're going to be taken over and they're going to die. And so this will help us to identify those trouble areas and better manage our resources. And there are so many people working behind the scenes to make everything happen that you never see, and those were a couple of them. Last but not least is my favorite, pickleball. And I have a friend who says he won't play a single game because it's like pickleball crack. And once he starts, he'll never be able to stop. But we ran a tournament in Ellen Brown, and Anish was named the Mid-Atlantic Facility General Manager of the Year by the United States Professional Tennis Association. And I have to say that the wall of awards in my office is about to fall over. There, between the White House and all the awards that we have that we've been nationally recognized for, we have so many great and so many good people that work for CA, so many subject matter experts all across the organization who do such a great job and do great things every day. And I hope that, that's it for today. More to come in December, but I'd like to say that it's not just about the fun stuff. It's also about all the people that work behind the scenes to make everything happen in Columbia and in CA, and to make us, nationally recognized as the best small city, the best city for women, the safest city. There are so many accolades that Columbia has won, and at the very center of all that is CA.
Thank you. Awesome. Next, we'll move on to resident speak out. Speakers will be asked to speak in the order in which they signed up. Individuals have 3 minutes to comment. Anyone representing an organization is allocated 5 minutes. Following remarks, the board will have a chance to ask questions. Please mute your microphones when you are not speaking. We'll ask the speakers to adhere to the 3 or 5 minute time limit when presenting their testimony, and for the board members to limit questions in order to stay within the allotted time limit. Our first resident is George Delaney.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor and pleasure to be here this evening to speak in support of the grant for the Howard County Monument for Veterans and Military Families. I've been a resident of Columbia since 1982. I live on Hayledge Court in the neighborhood of Thunder Hill in the village of Oakland Mills. And I love living here. It's a wonderful city and just a great place to live. I also want to bring the voice of the veterans to the meeting in a very short way. I am the Vice Commander of Columbia's Post 300 of the American Legion. My Commander, Shelby Rogers, and Adjutant Barbarlett send their greetings. They cannot be here this evening. We work alongside our sister post, 156 of the American Legion in Ellicott City. Between our two posts and in a close partnership with the VFW post in Ellicott City, 7472, we reach out to the thousands of veterans who are residents of Howard County. We've been told there are about 20,000 veteran residents. So with their families, we're looking at a family population of about 50,000 residents of the county. I am also, in addition to the Vice Commander of Columbia's post, I am the District 4 Adjutant of the Northern Central Region of the Department of Maryland American Legion. And in that capacity, I have oversight over 17 posts in the greater Baltimore area, including all of inner city Baltimore. So I've been carrying the message of the planned monument throughout that larger area and telling people throughout the Legion of what Columbia is trying to do in building this unique monument to veterans and families of veterans, and that's what's so special about it. I am convinced, based on the design and the discussions that we've had, that this monument will become a regional draw, a regional asset to this part of Maryland. So in my job as a vice commander and membership chairman, I have personally called over 150 veterans for what we call buddy check calls. And I started this in December 2022, and I'm still carrying this forward today. I've also trained 25 members of our posts to also call 10 veterans each. And I'm training successive teams of 25 veterans to call 10 more veterans. So we're reaching out in a very real way to the 20,000 veterans, many of whom have never spoken to another veteran or a veteran organization. In my one-on-one calls, out of those 150, I encountered 4 veterans who were on the verge of taking their own lives. And in all 4 cases, with the assistance and guidance of the Howard County Office of Veterans and Military Families, managed by Lisa Terry here and back, we successfully intervened and pulled those members back from the brink.
Thank you. That's time, but do you have a closing statement?
Sure. So anyhow, all these veterans that I talk to all have a common request. They want to be recognized, they want to be appreciated, and they want to be no longer silent and unknown. This monument will give them a place to bring their families and achieve that goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Karen?
Yeah, thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you for your service. Can you tell us a little bit about your service and what this monument means to you personally?
Sure, thank you. I was a cryptologic technician in the United States Naval Reserve, and I was in during Vietnam era, but I did not deploy to Vietnam. As you know, when any citizen signs up for military service, we sign a blank check and we go where we're told. So it's quite a thought to keep that in mind, that every veteran has given that blank check. So I had the pleasure of being trained in Pensacola, Florida, and then I was deployed to tough duty in Winter Harbor, Maine. And so the reason is there was a radio station there that had unique radio propagation capabilities. And I was believe it or not, I was a high-speed Morse intercept operator. And I'm able to say that now, that my job consisted of listening to adversarial messages from the Soviet bloc. So leaving the Navy after 6 years, I was told that I would be just doing paperwork, no more Morse code, so I moved on, and I became a firefighter in my city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. I did that for 7 years. I really enjoyed it. And then the National Security Agency at Fort Meade reached out to me, and it turns out that I had a skill that was no longer available. So they recruited me. I moved to Columbia, and I served 20 years in the National Security Agency, and I was a management troubleshooter. And my job was to go in various work centers, find out what was wrong, and provide a prescription to make them efficient again. So that was what I did there. I also have a private business based on things I learned in the service, management skills, and in college, of course. And I had a real estate development company, which I liquidated in COVID. It was in New England, and I was dependent on students and professors, and all the schools shut down. So, anything else?
Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dara Baker.
So not in my time, but in the weird ways of the universe is I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts for a number of years, and I'm also, I think like a lot of other people in here, a public servant. Hi, everyone. I am Dara Baker. Nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones. I'm here first to thank everyone on the board and my fellow CA residents for their time, energy, effort, knowledge, and sheer grit in ensuring better practice prevails for Columbia and Howard County's dwindling open space and forested resources. The Lake Elkhorn project was a bad idea from the time I first heard about it in 2021. The way I tell people, I came to hear a presentation on a massive project that would materially affect my home for decades, and got a marketing presentation. The harder the sell, the more suspicious I am. But to my surprise and increasing frustration, much of the CA board and CA staff seemed happy to buy into the rosy glasses of that marketing. It should be the board's role to ask the hard questions about large-scale projects brought before it. Like any review board, the point is to take a 10,000-foot view of what is being presented, not because the goal is to micromanage, but precisely because no one else at CA has the enterprise view provided by the board members. Those in this room who have volunteered their time to look after CA's future must look at the big picture, and big projects are a big picture. I implore the board to do two things this year to focus on the lessons learned from Lake Elkhorn. Approve guidelines and a budget for an independent financial audit for all CA transactions that involve land over 1 acre or that affect more than 10 households. As residents paying into the CA annual charge, we should have full transparency for actions that affect our investment. And those investments include, and this is a quote from the CA annual charge FAQ page, nearly 3,600 acres of open space, 95 miles of pathways, lakes, ponds, tot lots, and athletic courts that help make up CA. We need to know that we are getting a return on our investment. If 2 acres of land will be changed from forest to something else, what financial loss will that mean? How much would it take to replace forested land rather than using something else for the project? And the second one is, what is the state of CA's easements? Over a year ago, we asked the then CA General Counsel to inform the board and residents of what rights CA had to amend the WSSI easement. This still has not been answered as far as I'm aware. Who owns and who has access to CA lands through easements, leases, or otherwise should be one of the most transparent data points available to residents. A full review of how CA grants easements and a new set of guidelines for large-scale long-term projects must be developed to protect residents and CA resources from badly thought-out projects that sound too good to be true. CA should never grant an easement before a project is approved by permitting bodies. And lastly, and this is a line that you've heard from myself and a lot of my fellow residents who have gotten involved in this, CA should put a stop to all stream restoration projects, and we should hire a reputable, independent expert to look at areas that could benefit from upland stormwater management rather than relying on our streams as stormwater overflow valves. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? I do.
I do.
Alan.
Derek, I'm curious, what was in your mind when you say affected households? I mean, like, if I'm someone who walks regularly around Lake Elkhorn, but I live in Harper's Choice, am I in your mind, am I an affected household, or are you talking just geographically contiguous? What was in your mind?
For the purposes of what I was saying for the audit, I think it's more the contiguous and sort of people whose homes will be directly affected. I do think that one of the things that CA has to take into consideration that it's not just the local residents who use the resources, so you're right. But I think that is a fuzzy line, and I think starting with a stronger line of people who are close by who are affected or who are going to be directly affected by a project that has a downstream effect.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? I do have one question. So could you clarify what you mean by audit? Is this an appraisal of the potential easement? Is it something that goes beyond a financial appraisal? What do you mean?
I think we need to do both. I think we need to do a forensic audit of the project that was originally proposed and any sort of CA work that was gone into it, and sort of take a look and see what CA was going to be getting out of it. And then the other, I do think, is a combination between a financial audit and potentially a sort of larger ethical audit associated with those types of decisions.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have Debbie Bergio. She's representing the village of, she's representing her group, the Village in Howard, and so the Village in Howard.
Yep, the Village in Howard. Good evening, everyone. I am Debbie Bergio, Executive Director. The Village in Howard, we're a 501c3 dedicated to helping older adults age in place successfully, and we're located right on the other side of Broken Land off of Stevens Forest Road. So as a principal corporate entity in Howard County in which you serve as a quasi-governmental role for services such as parks, open spaces, and recreation services, we believe the Columbia Association has an equally important role in supporting nonprofit organizations serving Columbia residents. In previous years, CA did play an important role in supporting Columbia nonprofits. CA support was critical to establishing the Village in Howard, and without CA support, we likely would never have come into existence or gotten off the ground. CA support has made it possible for us to provide services to seniors to enable them to safely to age in place in the community that they love. CA support has enabled us to provide over 7,000 hours of volunteer support to seniors each year for the last 8 years. Several years ago, CA discontinued support to most, if not all, Columbia nonprofits, and we believe the local nonprofit community and the community in general has suffered as a result. The Village in Howard requires that a small portion of lien funds, requests that a small portion of lien funds collected from every Columbia homeowner again be used to support nonprofits that benefit our community. We understand that Mr. Santos would like to see the CA resume support of Columbia nonprofits, and we strongly support this effort. We do have 185 members, and most of whom live within the Columbia, some beyond in Ellicott City, but most in Columbia. I just want to thank you for your time and your consideration of Mr. Santos and the return of the nonprofit funding by CA.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Alan.
Yeah, thank you. Debbie, before we stopped funding based on economic issues during the pandemic, we did turn over funds to the Community Foundation, or what I still call the Columbia Foundation. Did your organization apply to them for funds and were rejected, or did you not apply to them, or how did that work?
Pete, can you address
Yes, we did, and we did receive some funding from the, we did apply for funds through the Community Foundation, and we did get an award from them for 1 year.
And so could you, I just frankly am torn about this, because on the one hand, I liked honoring particular organizations. On the other hand, we respected their expertise in terms of funding organizations. What would be better why would it be better for you to have CA directly fund you rather than give funds to the foundation and have the foundation fund organizations like that?
I think what we're interested in doing is be able to compete for those funds, assuming that they were assigned from CA to the Community Foundation. So we're not looking for direct, I mean, it would be nice, but we're not looking for a direct amount of money from CA. We had, in the first 4 years of our existence, we did get such funding. We understand that it was moved over to the Community Foundation at some point, and we would be happy to compete with anybody else for that.
Thank you for that, because I misunderstood. I thought you were wanting direct funds from CA. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Just if we could introduce the nice gentleman who just spoke.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Pete Brunner. I have a number of different hats with the Village in Howard. I'm also on, at some point I was on the Senior Advisory Committee, now the mellifluously sounding AWCAC, and as well as being on the Commission on Aging for a number of years.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Bob Dover.
Hello, folks. The CA Watershed Management Plan was approved in 2009. The plan is still on your website, and CA staff and WAC continue to refer to it, so I assume you still consider it to be in effect. I've conducted a detailed review of the plan, and it has multiple major flaws. The most egregious of these is that the plan didn't include any mechanism for reviews and updates, which is a standard component of any similar management plan for any agency I ever worked for. The plan's now 14 years old. The CA Open Space Assessment conducted in 2017 acknowledged this problem and recommended that an update of the plan be performed. However, that was 6 years ago, and that recommendation still hasn't been followed. In addition to being outdated, CA has failed to follow some of the most important recommendations made in that plan. Instead, the staff and the WAC continue to implement or proposed actions that were specifically rejected in that plan, as if it never existed. Taken together, these issues mean that CA's watershed program is effectively operating outside of any formally approved plan. They're making it up as they go along without any independent technical input. In September, the Long Reach Village Board submitted their 2025 budget priorities to you and included a request that the budget include an update of the 2009 Watershed Management Plan. I've now sat through the staff's budget presentations twice, and note that the budget includes funding of the plan, but not an update of the plan, as was recommended in the open space assessment and as was requested by Long Reach Village. Unfortunately, Reg, the representative from Long Reach, is currently unavailable to advocate for this budget request on behalf of his village. A couple nights ago, I presented this information to the Long Reach Village Board and asked that they request a written response from CA explaining why the staff continues to ignore the recommendations in the open space assessment and why they continue to take ad hoc actions in the watersheds that were specifically prohibited in the 2009 plan. I don't know if the village board will follow up on that, but I hope this board will, and will consider asking the staff to explain why they continue to claim that their projects are part of that plan when that's clearly not the case. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Thank you.
I do.
Oh, sorry, Alan.
Bob, without going into too much detail and without going through everything you've noted, what are one or two things that you believe CA is doing that violate the 2009 plan?
I brought the specific pages with me. The 2009 plan recommends delaying large-scale restoration of stream morphology until stream flows in the upstream catchment have been stabilized. In other words, don't do any large-scale stream restoration projects until we deal with the upstream flows. That was in the plan, and both the Longfellow project and the Elkhorn project violate that recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Next, we have Wanda Riddle, representing Howard County Veterans Foundation.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Wanda Riddle. I am the Vice President of the Howard County Veterans Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization. Tonight, I'm offering testimony in support of a $100,000 grant towards the construction and installation of the Howard County Veterans and Military Families Monument. Before I begin, I want to like to acknowledge that I'm accompanied here this evening by members of my board of directors, as well as representatives of the American Legion Post 156, American Legion Post 300, Veterans of the Foreign War 7472, the Marine Corps League, and the Howard County Veterans Commission for Veterans and Military Families, and the Office of Veterans and Military Families. Representing our Gold Star, Maryland Gold Star mothers is Ms. Teresa Mills Carlson in the back. What I'd like to say is that these are all local community organizations, each doing remarkable work for veterans, their families, and our greater community right here in our own backyard. Just acknowledge, and here's Lisa back here as well. There's Paul Rivers. I want to thank the Columbia Association for your time and consideration of our request, and a special thank you to Reg Avery for submitting it on our behalf. The Howard County Veterans and Military Families Monument is to be installed in Millie Bailey Park at the Columbia Lakefront as an expression of appreciation from our community for the service and sacrifice of our veterans and military families. Your contribution to this grant would represent a continuation of the long-standing relationship between CA and the veterans of Columbia and Howard County. Most notably has been CA's demonstrated commitment to celebrating and sponsoring the Veterans Day celebration at the Lakefront and the Veterans Day parade that winds through Meriwether District and down Little Patuxent Parkway. In fact, that same celebration will take place this coming Sunday with parade step-off at 9:30 and the celebration at the Lakefront immediately following. So again, we appreciate the partnership and leadership of CA in recognizing our veterans community. In pursuing the concept of a Veterans Monument, we have been committed to these principles: prioritize design excellence, integrate this monument into the new downtown as a centrally located, universally accessible gathering area, be inclusive through consultation with veterans, relevant county agencies, community stakeholders, and other public processes, and finally, contribute to and support the county's vision for itself as a place that is creative, caring, inclusive, and respectful. Our fundraising goal for this project is $2.75 million. We have raised the following: $1.5 million in state of Maryland grants, $295,000 in Howard County grants, and $51,000 in private donations such as individuals, corporations, and grants. Our capital campaign committee is working to close the gap between the stated goal and what we have raised to date. The real work of this committee is ongoing, but was bolstered by our public design reveal this past June, right out here in Millie Bailey Park. As you would expect, having a design that we can show to potential donors helps with the discussion as we talk with them going forward. If approved, the Columbia Association grant would significantly help close the fundraising gap. Our vision is that this beautiful piece of public art will serve as a permanent reminder that the legacy of Columbia and the greater Howard County community exists because of the men and women, as well as their families, who serve our nation both in times of conflict and peace. I want to highlight that the title of this monument includes military families. That was integral to our concept from the beginning and an important aspect of our design development. As veterans, we know full well that our families are critical to our being able to successfully focus on the mission. For that, we are forever grateful. Our hope is that this monument will offer the residents of Columbia and Howard County a place for reflection, conversation, education, and above all, a healing space. We hope to not only cultivate a deeper public appreciation for the courage, convictions, and sacrifices made by veterans and military families in support of community and nation, but also provide a meaningful space for all to reflect upon and renew collective appreciation for the profound costs and value of our freedoms. For more information on the parade or this monument, go to the foundation website at howardcountyveterans.org. And I thank you for your consideration and time. I'm happy to take questions, and I'll do my best to answer all of them either now or at some other time individually.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? I do have one question. What happens if you can't close the funding gap? What happens to the monument?
Well, we will continue to try and raise the money for the monument installation. We have the design. And we have all of these other contributions that we've got setting aside. But before you can actually start construction on this public art piece or any construction project that I'm aware of, you have to have the money in the bank. You don't want to start a project and then not be able to complete it. And so that's our goal. And I have brought some material here that I'll just put here at the end, and you can pass it around if you're interested. And of course, shamelessly plug our Veterans Day Parade on Sunday. We hope to see you out there.
Thanks for coming out tonight. I appreciate all the numbers you gave as far as the fundraising. Could you give us an idea of what your expected timeline is so that we could have, that would help with some of the discussion?
Yes, sir. So we're looking, from those numbers, you can tell we have about a little over $1 million, maybe $1.2 million that we still need to raise for the construction, actual capital construction costs. But once we get that contract signed, then we're looking anywhere from an 18-month to 24-month process for finding the materials, cultivating the materials, fabrication, transportation, installation, and all of that.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Sarah Kellett, representing Protect Our Ponds. I believe she's virtual. Sarah, are you out there?
Yes, she's out there.
You out there?
She's out there, but she's muted.
Sarah, I think you're muted.
All right, hello?
We can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share the residents' experiences in Columbia with you all today. I would like to first make it clear that prior to my last speak out, there was a discrepancy about whether or not I was responded to with regards to my concerns over the Sewell's Orchard Park Ponds project. I had not received any response prior to my last speak out, although I have since received a response, which I very much appreciate from you all. The thing that concerns me, however, is what was written in the response from CA management. It is still extremely clear that, well, it looks extremely clear to me that no real consideration was put into the discharge rate for the Sewell's Orchard Park Ponds project. There were some points there that look like they were written to be persuasive. However, if you really look at them, there's not a lot of depth there, and I will respond with detail to each point, and that will be forthcoming. There's a lot to say, and I really appreciate you all sticking through and listening to what I have to say about this very important project. It's affecting all of the residents. In fact, the beeping just stopped just a couple of minutes ago, and I think we only had one shaking of the house that felt like an earthquake today from the project, because we've been having a series of what seems like earthquakes from the project. So it is affecting us profoundly over here, and I greatly appreciate your consideration around what's going on with this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Alan.
I should know this, but are you referring to a county project or a CA project?
Well, it's a county project. However, the county asked CA for permission to increase the discharge rate into the Elkhorn branch stream. And CA, that's something that CA should have very carefully considered, because it's a huge project. And CA, I don't believe, put 5 minutes of consideration into it. And because they did not put any consideration into it, we are going to be having months and months of extra construction. I mean, the consequences are just enormous. It's going to be extremely impactful to the wildlife. It will, it's not beneficial to the waterway, I don't think. So it's pretty sad what has happened here.
So at this point, what is it that you're asking CA to do, or are you just letting us know that we screwed up in your belief?
I have very serious concerns about watershed management in CA. I am a very passionate environmentalist. I think what the decisions that are made in the watershed matter. I think they have big ripple effects. And if huge projects are not really being thought through very well or not taken seriously, I think some reevaluation of how CA manages its waterways needs to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. That concludes resident speak out for this evening. To limit interruptions during board discussion, all members of the general public will now be returned to the audience. This means you'll no longer be able to show your camera or unmute your audio, but you're more than welcome to stay on as an attendee and watch the remainder of the work session. You can also watch a live stream on the CA Livestream YouTube page. Thank you so much for your participation tonight. We'll now take a 5-minute recess. Please return at 10 of. I'd like to continue the meeting. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda with the appointment of the Oakland Mills Community Association representative to the Aging Well in Columbia Advocacy Committee. It's approved by consent of the board, and that member is Virginia Thomas. Next on the agenda, we have board votes. The chair moves to turn responsibility for the Millennial and Teen and Middle School Advisory Committees and the Aging Well and Columbia Advocacy Committee over to the appropriate CA and division. Is there a second for the motion?
Second.
Andy, the chair moves. Andy seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, do you want to say something, Sky? Or?
No,
okay.
Later.
Seeing no discussion, are there any objections to the motion? Seeing no objections, the motion is passed by unanimous consent.
I have a comment now.
Nick, regarding what?
Regarding the committees.
The motion passed, so what's...
I understand that. I voted.
So what's the comment?
In the past month, so many people have contacted me who are committee members and committee chair, and they have not been aware that they are now under the staff rather than the board. And I would like to recommend some sort of a memo to be sent to all committee chair and committee members, notifying them of that, and perhaps telling them that changes to their bylaws are in the works.
I think that's reasonable.
Agreed.
Thanks. Thanks for the recommendation. Next, we have board discussion. The first item on today's agenda for board discussion is the FY25 budget discussion, including the draft operating budget, capital budget, and the community survey results. So I will turn it over to Susan if she has any comments, and if not, I'll turn it over to the board for questions.
So thank you, appreciate that. I do want to distribute for you we sent out the board member questions earlier this week, but I didn't make hard copies just because it was so late. Thank you. Thanks. No. And we did do the follow-up survey, or this next step survey. You saw I think the video for the survey push last time. We distributed that to push that out through social media, through the village newsletters and CA newsletters. But I have to say I was disappointed. We only received 95 responses to that survey. So last year, for the survey at the same point in the budget process, it was 214. This year, only 95. And we still distributed it as widely as possible. So overall, it was very neutral. The 62% of those 95 people, which were, well, first of all, 62% of those folks said it was their first year engaging with the budget process. There were participants from all of the villages, with the most active being Oakland Mills and the least active Dorsey, Search, and River Hill. In general, they were neutral on a scale of 1 to 5 as to whether CA should maintain its existing services and programs. It was 3.4, stayed basically the same, 3.4. And overall comments, general contentment with CA's current range of services and facilities, want continued accessibility, which is one of your strategic priorities that you voted on in September, want to see continued budget stewardship, and there was, interestingly, there was support for funding of nonprofit organizations like the Community Foundation, and the language for most of those comments was almost identical. So that was just an interesting bit of feedback there. So that's all the new information from at this point in the process. So I'll turn that back over to you.
Okay, thanks.
Susan, could I just ask you a question about the survey? When you talked about participation, were those, when you and the two villages that had the lowest participation and the highest, were you using percentages of village population or just raw numbers of number of people who responded?
out of the 95, the distribution of the 95 respondents across the villages.
Yeah, but were you,
Just a percent of the total being 95.
so the percentage of the people who responded, not the number who responded as a percentage of the village population?
Right, that was be minuscule, yeah.
That would be, yeah, okay, thank you.
So the second, that brings us also up to the two board questions that we have hard copies of. Do you want to make any comments regarding those?
Let me pull that up. So we prepared, those were the two that the board voted on for us to review. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The first related to town halls. We did some work in-house to determine how much that would cost and what that would take. And some possible, for the town halls, we think that offset would be from other community engagement activities. For the grants, those are higher dollar amounts, and we worked as a team with under Dennis's leadership, and Dan and Jeremy and I and Lynn all dug into that, and those are the places where we think would make the most sense for offset for a grant for this year. So I think that's it, and take whatever questions you might have.
Are there any questions regarding either the questions or the survey from the board? Sky.
I have a question about the town hall. What I had in mind was not necessarily to outsource any part of it, but to have 2 hours of a resident speak out. And I think that would be a lot less financially to put on something like that. Would that be feasible? And I also had in mind perhaps the first one to be whatever anybody wanted to talk about, and then we could see how many people talked about subject A versus subject B.
So if it's not facilitated other than to maybe manage time of speakers, if there's a time limit like Resident Speak Out has, but there's no facilitation of accumulating questions or trying to draw out, areas of interest or whatever, I think certainly our staff could do that, and it wouldn't be overwhelming. I think our context for what we came up with for the estimate was based on a facilitated exchange that had some pre-work, some materials developed, and where there was actually, engagement with the participants, and that I would say we should outsource. We don't necessarily have that muscle in-house.
Any further questions on either of these two topics? Andy?
Yeah, I was thinking about the town hall, and I was thinking like in this day and age, I mean, the town hall, which we did a number of years ago, I thought was appropriate for the time. But given we have so many different ways of communicating now, and so many different ways that people do communicate, I'm thinking that maybe we should, instead of looking like at a facilitated type town hall, look at a variety of activities that might reach people, different numbers of people through different media ways of doing things. And some that maybe may not cost us that kind of money, as like just having a larger resident speak out, or maybe having a Zoom meeting on some particular topic. And I was thinking of how we sometimes do the are you interested in running for the rep, where there's kind of like a facilitated meeting. I mean, not necessarily facilitated, but maybe things like that, maybe different media type things might be actually better than putting the money or a chunk of money into a town hall, which may only appeal to a certain segment of the community versus trying to find different ways of appealing to different segments.
Alan's got his hand up.
I'll let Susan, if you want to answer that.
I don't have any comments.
If you have any comments? In that case, I'll go to Alan.
Yeah, Andy, I hear what you're saying, but for me, it's a both and. I do facilitation and face-to-face meetings as well as virtual meetings for a living, and both have their strengths, but one is not a substitute for the other. So I'm with you on various kinds of meetings, some focused Zoom kinds of things, but there's something about the synergy, and I know it's an overused cliche, but there's something about the synergy that happens when people get together face to face. That's just a human connection thing that creates a different kind of energy, creates a different kind of information flow, is more conducive to people bouncing ideas off of each other and then creating better ideas because of it. And, you know, I don't want to read too much into one survey, but, you know, if we're having trouble getting more than 95 people to respond to a budget survey, it feels like we run the risk of just sort of dividing and conquering and just having a bunch of little small things that would be easy to see them as too small and ignore them. So I'd be in favor of putting some funds into a larger face-to-face gathering, whether it's facilitated by us or facilitated external.
So go Bill and Karen. Bill?
Okay, just a quick comment. I don't have a question for Susan, but this has devolved into a discussion, so I was going to throw my 2 cents in. I was the one who put this out as part of our budget process, and I think this bears out what I thought it would be, that a town hall is just about right at the level of a Category 3 spending project, which really doesn't require board approval or anything. I think that it's vital that we get out there in the community and allow people to come out and congregate and attend. We're kind of in that mode again now where we can meet with people, and I think it's important to see people face to face. We are already doing this at the staff level. We have it rolled out for a year now, the Change Columbia series, and I think that that's going well. I've attended 3 of them, I think, so far, and they've been attended at different levels, but great information is shared, and I think those are going really, really well. This is at the board level, what the board would like to do as far as a town hall meeting. And if we did 1 or 2, I think that the budget would probably absorb that without any real further discussion at this budgetary level. But if I think we need to do probably 3. And then I thought we should actually look at what the total cost of that would be. So I appreciate the feedback here.
So I do have one question for Susan. So you mentioned this would be a type 3 expense. Would this be a type 3 capital expense, or would this be more like an operational expense?
No, this is an operating expense.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's equivalent to the project, I said, right? So,
Karen?
Yeah, I think this is super important because we have 3 big decisions that are coming up where we're going to want to hold, I believe, a town hall, the budget, when that comes to a vote. I think we're going to want to have a town hall about the new president, and I think we're going to want to have a town hall about the strategic plan. So I think these are 3 different things where we want to make sure we pull in as many residents as possible. So I'm in favor of us putting some funds towards town halls.
I apologize for coming right back in, but just a clarification, this is for the 24 budget, so this is for activities starting next May. And we will probably have most of those decisions already decided that you mentioned, Karen, before May, right? That's what we're talking about here. Correct?
Yeah, so the budget discussion is for next fiscal year.
Correct, thank you.
But the question that I think Karen's bringing up is there funds available to have these type of town halls to discuss these issues for this fiscal year? Dennis.
So a couple thoughts. One is that I think what's more important than having the town hall is who shows up, or who do we get to come out to the town hall. And we had 95 people, and we did all the things we thought we should do, but it didn't work out well for us in that case, for that survey. Now, I will say we did a QR code survey for the play area and tot lot thing, and we wanted 300 total, and we got 300 the first day. Now, Eric said 400 of them were his. The math doesn't work. But, you know, my thought is maybe we should spend some money on how we engage with the community. Because if we're going to hear from the same people over and over again, we're going to get to have the same discussion, and why spend $25,000 to have that same discussion? How do we get people engaged? And let's find someone who can help us do that. And like the QR code thing was a surprise. Like damn, the first day we made our number. maybe there's some things that are out there that are fairly simple we can do, and we can bring people in that we have not engaged with. That's my thought.
For the record, that's just how many times my son told me he pressed the QR button.
Eric Diedrich.
Diedrich.
When we're talking about an in-person town hall, is this town hall solely in person, or is it a hybrid is it like this meeting where people can also participate virtually?
I would imagine that it would probably have to be hybrid, given the current state of things. That's my guess, but I think that's more of a staff decision.
We envisioned hybrid in this, or at least, kind of a webinar format, at least live streamed, if not active participation, at least.
Yeah, and I think that's a big distinction, though, between live streaming and actual, where people can actually participate virtually.
And I would say with the processes that you have underway, those are consultant-led already and have, the community engagement piece built in. So, and we did also have a virtual kind of budget town hall last week for the community, and that was, I thought, well advertised and pushed out. We had Village help with that as well, and the turnout for that was not great. And I think I don't necessarily think it's the way that we engage. I think it's the topic, whether people are interested in the topic or not. And so I think that would drive more interest.
My son was certainly interested in tot lots. Any other questions on town hall before I shift over to the impact of grants? So next, does anybody have any questions on the grant impact on the questionnaire? I do have one question. So I know we asked for $200,000. So far, we've got about $200,000 in requests. I could see up to $400,000 in requests. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you have any idea what the impact of a $400,000 grant request or grant funding would be for this fiscal year?
Yeah, I don't know about another 200,000, but we talked about the next things that we would cut would be starting with the new positions requested in the maintenance area. So that was next, and that wouldn't get up to that's not $200,000.
Yeah, I asked because I foresee having about $400,000 in grant requests this fiscal year.
Having missed the last meeting, I just wanted to know, did we actively discuss the strategic priorities and how they're being applied? Okay, so I'll just make my pitch again. I'm kind of boring about this, but the idea that we're discussing specific line items in the budget and having staff review questions, and the board hasn't reviewed the strategic priorities to find out, does the budget actually do the things that we asked to have done? I have a very difficult time with that, and I'll continue to say that, and obviously everyone doesn't have to agree, but as a board, the idea that we're going after this and we haven't had any conversation whatsoever regarding the strategic priorities that we sat here and debated is really, really very concerning to me, okay? So I would love to see us pivot a little bit and have some broader conversations. And if I'm incorrect in terms of not having, I checked in with my buddy here, and I don't believe that we had those conversations, but I just want to put that out there when I see line items like this.
So I actually, Alan, do you have something quickly on?
I just want to say I 100% agree with Keith. It's a much more elegant way of saying what I've been saying for years, is we need to have those philosophical discussions first before we get into specific line items.
So I agree with Keith also, and I do want to try to use that opportunity to pivot a bit. I know one of our strategic goals was looking at facilities, so I do want to take that opportunity to start looking at the capital budget, because the capital budget focuses on facilities. So I will, and basically the way I'm going to approach this discussion is we'll go to the capital budget, and we'll try to keep this at a sort of a high level strategic viewpoint. I don't want to go into individual tot lots. And then from there, we'll look at the operational budget from a high level strategic plan.
I just wanted to make one additional point, is that as a group here, we spent a lot of time even prioritizing, and the fact that we were discussing grant money, and again, just for the record, so if anyone's listening, it's not that I'm opposed to grant money, but what we talked about is in the strategic priorities, what we wanted to do is to make sure that we prioritized maintenance structures, and at least having a clear picture and understanding of maintenance plans, right?
Yes.
Having a clear understanding of where we stood on that before we really started jumping into these topics. And what the board has done is, even though we sat and agreed on all of that, we jumped right into talking about specific line items of grants. And I get it, because I was even taken, I had a meeting outside of here also. Someone wanted to pitch me for grants also, but I just wanted to point that out.
No, it's noted, and I definitely see where you're coming from. So yeah, I wanted to make sure we covered the questions first. But I do agree, I want to get this up to a more strategic level. Susan, do you have a comment?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I could, we are going to discuss a great number of things here. It was just, there were two questions that were hanging at the end of our last meeting, and those got addressed.
And we're just wrapping those up.
I don't want anybody to think that we prioritized grants and the open, the town halls. It's just that those were the open questions.
We're prioritizing questions. I think Susan wanted to make a comment.
So I just wanted to, I have the presentation from last time where we did run through how these projections were developed, and one of the key elements obviously was your strategic priorities. So this presentation we just posted today on the website in the budget section, and I'll make sure that you have it. We took what the board voted on and did use it to make sure that we address those items in the budget. And I did try to share that with you 2 weeks ago when we talked about this. And in the capital section, sorry, don't want to go flying past it. I talked about, and you can't see it on my notes, but I've gone through and actually identified which of your strategic priorities is reflected in these particular capital allocations. So that process did occur, at least in the staff work behind the scenes.
Okay. So
another comment?
The piece that I'm really wanting to understand, and I definitely appreciate that, is did we as a board, and this isn't your question, but do we as a board know that the team and the staff is meeting all of its objectives in terms of maintaining all of our properties and the things that we want to do? Was that discussed, and we have a firm understanding of that?
We did talk about that, and I explained that, I'm going to have to find it. Well, let me find it. So that we have plans for most of these things, and we listed, and in the overview, we describe where we have specific plans, maintenance plans or reinvestment plans. We're meeting almost all of them. The two that we are not is the pathways. The team would like a 25-year replacement cycle. We're at a 30-year replacement cycle, and equipment and vehicles is a little bit longer than what the team had identified, and that's noted in the overview of the materials. And we also describe where we have the various items that we have plans for, and the work that's done, the facility inspections, et cetera, that's done.
So I'm not sure if this is where you're getting at, but I get the sense that one of the questions that you might have, or from a strategic perspective, is how does this year's capital budget fit into a sort of a greater capital plan for CA over the next, say, 5, 10, 20 years? Because this represents 1 year of things that most of it's stuff that we got to maintain, fix, replace. There's some new. There are a couple of new items in here, but most of it's sort of replacement type of things. So I think the question is, over the next 5 years, 10 years, are there any? How does this measure up to future capital budget potential capital budgets? Is there like some? Is it projected to be fairly steady over the next 5, 10 years of things we need to replace? Are there some things that we need to plan for that, okay, in 5 years, something big's going to come up and we need, the capital budget will double for some reason. So I guess that's, strategically, that's, I think, one of the questions that you might be getting to.
So we are in the process of getting the CIP distributable to you guys, so we'll get that out there. And it does fluctuate in that the front of it, and this is, I've done this a long time, and every time the first couple years are very high and it tails off, right? Because everyone wants what they want in the early part. You'll be able to see that it's generally reasonably consistent because we are following these maintenance plans for the big part of our asset.
Sky, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question about the grants, and I'm wondering, we've kind of veered off. Will we be returning to that discussion at a later time?
At a later date when they vote for. So basically what will happen is this is a discussion. In December, we'll vote on the draft framework, which is the framework which the staff will build the budget for us to vote on in February. So that's the schedule of events. And I believe typically the grant vote would come up in February. That's how it was done in the past.
It did come up, and it came up late.
Came up late last.
It came up then, but that's not when it should come up. We would need to know in December, really, if you want to fund grants.
So if we want to, so basically your request from us is to try to get the grants finalized in December.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Right. Yes.
I'm just making sure everyone knows that the CIP is the capital improvement plan.
Yep.
Everybody here understands that, and it has things in there like we know that the Supreme Sports Club roof is now 7 years old, and that in 9 years it will need to be replaced, and we set aside money in that year. It doesn't always exactly work out that way. And so as an organization, we're funding mostly maintenance of existing facilities, but not some things that I'm thinking about in Kings. There was a thought that we might do a splash pad and then take the meeting room and turn that into a larger bathhouse and a changing room and meeting room and other things. So what's funded in that capital improvement plan and what the capital budget allows for really is a continuation of mostly the assets we have with some improvements as they age. So like at Stonehouse and the Art Center, we're putting a elevator in and getting it back into the century in terms of the fit and finishes. But we'll always have the roofs so that they're watertight and the HVAC so it works and electrical and those things. But bigger projects, 50-meter pools and those kinds of things, they're not in the capital improvement plan. They don't fit in terms of what we think we can borrow or what we can spend in a capital budget in 5, 8, 10 years.
So I do have one question. So you mentioned the word borrow. In the capital improvement plan, are we projecting to borrow money to support the plan?
So the capital improvement plan just focuses on the fixed assets and what is needed to keep them in good repair or refreshed. It does not have any correlation to cash flow, which is what would drive the borrowing needs. So we use it to help project the cash flow needs in the future, but it's a tool, not an instrument that would indicate whether we're borrowing or not.
And the cash flow needs are relatively consistent year over year?
They continue relatively consistent.
Is there?
No, I would say that they
really.
can't be relatively consistent because we have inflation. And when we have to raise, minimum wage.
Well, I don't mean consistent as an equal value. I mean consistent as in they don't do this. They don't jump up and down.
Well, they did. They did the last few years. So if you'd been asking me that 3 years ago, I would not have expected the, crazy ups and downs. And so at this point, I hope that they will be, and the expectation that they'll be reasonably predictable. But then the regulations and regulatory impact, I still am concerned about insurance. And just that these are short-term things. I still don't know if interest rates are going up again. So there are a great deal of unknowns.
Keith?
I think Bill had his hand up.
Bill? I saw them both at the same time.
I'm ready. Here we go. As far as I know, the capital improvement plan is going to fluctuate. So you're going to have some tile lot replacements, some pedestrian bridge replacements in every year for sure. But things like roof replacements are going to come along every 15 years or something like that, and that's going to cause a spike, or there's going to be lulls based on some of these other bigger ticket items that are either due or not due. And then there are externalities like regulatory reform, which will drive a capital improvement project to be moved up or to be created that we did not anticipate. Mm-hmm. So it does move around a little bit, but there is some commonality among some of the smaller things like bridges and tot lots, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Keith?
And I apologize that if you've presented, what I was going after is seeing if there was an understanding or consensus that we all knew about all of these priorities. But I want to get back to infrastructure because of something you said, Dennis, is that, like, and I'm not sitting here trying to advocate for a specific project, but you brought up King's Contrivance, and there are a number of evolutions that we expect within CA. So there's maintaining what we have. And then I don't believe that our residents expect us to maintain what we have. You know, there's an expectation that these things are continuing to evolve, that we're strategizing around what's next. And I'm just wondering, like when I look at this and says, do we have a plan? And that plan isn't just steady state, in my opinion. It's kind of evolution. Is that baked in a meaningful way here? And that's what I wanted to understand.
So yes, that work is done all the time, and we had, as Dan led, significant reconstruction projects at the athletic club, and then at Supreme we had Columbia Gym in the pipeline, and then COVID hit, so we got some work done there that's made a big difference to members. So those are just some examples, and those items are phased in as they're allowed, you know, as the funding and capacity is allowed, but that work is done all the time before.
But I think, Keith, you're asking about the difference between projects that are basically repair, replacement, things that keep Columbia moving at sort of a steady state versus things that are new and are bigger improvements, such as if you had a 50-meter pool, that would be something that's brand new. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, and what I was going to clarify is I see some of the improvements that happen, renovations that are happening, but you know, specifically relative to pools. And again, I want to be careful because I don't want everyone to think that I'm sitting here just because I'm King's Contrivance advocating for a pool in King's Contrivance. But my understanding is that there's a pool plan, and we're supposed to be going through and evolving some of those pools. And what I believe you also just said is that as we're able to, or as we're allowed to stick things in, and that, I guess I struggle a little bit with that because it sounds like we may not be giving you guidance as to say, you know what, we don't want to just fit certain things in. We expect that this is what's going to happen, and then you have to let us know, well, sorry, we don't have the money for it, and right, here are the other options. I think that's some of the dialogue that I'm wanting to dig into, is not just the steady state, and I see some of the capital projects, but some of the meaningful things, and I don't know, 50-meter pool, if that's what people want and is as part of our plan, to me, it's better than fighting year over year as to whether we can slide it in, and just saying, you know what, at year 1, we're going to have this, at year 3, we're going to have this, at year 5, we're going to have this, so that we know what we're up against. Because the other side of this is that, you know, I know that there are going to be conversations about like the assessment and whether, you know, whether we should be, you know, is the assessment sufficient? Is it too much? But until we get to the point where we understand our evolution, that's the piece that I'm a little bit struggling with.
Any other questions, comments? Dennis.
So from my perspective, what makes that complicated is that CA as an organization has created this huge animal that is 172 tot lots and 95 miles of pathways and an indoor swim center that's now 50 years old and the ice rink and all these things that sit out there that we have to maintain. And we're not a county government. We don't have huge amounts of capital money. And so if you think about just trying to maintain all those things, what's left? You're not going to let the the swim center HVAC, we just replaced the main pool HVAC, it was $500,000. And that was in yesterday's dollars. In today's dollars, it's whatever it is. And so trying to get, it feels like if you want to do something really different, then you have to relook at what you have and do something different with that, and maybe take some of those assets and do something else, take them out of service, because you've got 23 outdoor pools. What does it cost you to keep them in coping zones and filters and bathhouses and all the things? It's a lot of money just to keep that thing fed.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm letting Keith do all the talking because I agree with a lot of what he's saying. And I think what we're talking about here, though, Dennis, is, okay, you've got 23 pools, and this is what they looked like today. What is the 5-year plan for the pools? So when I sit here today and I look and I'm like, where do I want my pools to be in 5 years? What does that look like? How much does that cost? Do I have a plan for that? Okay, does it fit in my budget? Is it going to take me 5 years? Maybe I can do it in 3 years. Is it a higher priority? Or is it going to take me 7 years? And that's really what the board is looking for here is we have a plan for how we want to evolve the pools. How are you going to divide that up over time? What can you accomplish in year 1? What can you accomplish in year 2? Keith, am I kind of... Yeah. I think that's really what we're trying to get to here. It's not like shove it all. I get it. You guys are managing a ton of stuff. You really are. But,
So, Keith?
Yeah, that's exactly, and we're coming up with what I believe are like the strategic hard conversations, and that is, and you brought it up a bit, and so you said, we have 23 pools, and we have all of these pieces, and the strategic conversation is that what this needs to look like into the future? And as much as we are going to have town halls and other pieces to discuss all of those pieces, I think that's why we're here. We're not here necessarily for line items. We're here to make the big decisions that are going to say, what is Columbia going to look like 20 years from now?
Bill, then Karen.
All right. I think we're here tonight to talk about the budget because that's what's before us on the agenda. We definitely have to get a budget passed for FY '25, right? So yes. That needs to happen. And I think we also, as a board, need to think strategically about over-the-horizon kind of decisions for sure. We've got plenty of meetings left in this year, and I think we could certainly do that, but we need to get the work that we set out to do here done. And I think it's important to where the 7 or the 10-year plan reflects back on this single-year budget, process. There is linkage there, but we're really talking two things, I think.
Karen?
I disagree with that statement. I think we're just asking Susan, like, what are the plans based on the guidance that the board gave you? What are the plans that you were looking to fund? How long is that going to take you? And like at the subject of the pools, just use that as an example. Okay, if our pools are super, super expensive to run, they're the number one most favorite thing of all our residents. They're super expensive to run. What do we need to do to modernize our pools? What does that plan look like? So I would expect staff to say we need to modernize our pools to make them more efficient. Here's the plan. It costs this much. We propose doing it over 10 years. I think that's what we're looking for here. So
I'd like to make one comment to try to focus the discussion a little bit. If you look at the capital 2 expenses, I see 2 types of expenses in there. There's the maintenance, repair, keep things going type of expenses, and then there's brand new things. With the former, if we could separate that out, I think that'd be helpful for the board. But with the former, those are things that need to be done. It's not something that we can really debate. It's like, okay, it needs a new roof, it needs a new HVAC system. You just need to do that, or else the asset's no longer going to run. And I think with that perspective, with those type of assets, I think it would be helpful to know not just this year, but what are the out years going to look like, so we can sort of plan ahead. Okay, if this year's light, should we put more money or be able to dedicate more money so that when the next year that is going to require more repairs comes through, that we have that money available in reserve. So that's I think one issue. The other issue is when we're talking something brand new, like a brand new facility, like a brand new tennis club or a brand new swimming pool. That's something that really requires a board vote and it requires a board vote anyway, but it requires the board to discuss, okay, how does this new facility fit into our strategic plan, our strategic objectives, and how does it also fit into the long-term plans, because that's something that will need to be maintained going forward. Most of the items in this capital budget for type 2 seem to be on the maintenance repair type of things. There's, I think, only a couple that are really new assets.
Keith? So just a couple of comments. Number one, from myself personally, other than line items, I have confidence that the budget that we are going to approve and may approve in December is a very good budget and has all the things that we need to take care of generally. And I'm willing to back off on these strategic conversations, but I want to make sure that we follow up after this very quickly in order to make sure that we have these types of plans, because I know we're not going to get it done before a December vote. But largely, a lot of the debate that's going on, I have a lot of confidence that the budget's going to pull together in a reasonable fashion. We need to start having and immediately start having these strategic conversations, because I am bothered about the future of our pools. I am bothered about the future of the tot lots and all of those components, because I just see the whole, I see things deteriorating, right? And I, 17 years here, I think that while we're maintaining, I don't know that we're evolving for the future. And that's the piece that I would really like us to spend some time on. So I agree with you, Bill.
So it sounds like what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that these type of discussions are really critical when we start talking about the strategic plan, have the strategic plan meetings, because that's where we can start bringing really having these strategic long-term discussions versus the one-year budget.
In responding to that, yes, I think it's strategic plan, but I think we have to regularly have these types of conversations, because when we talk about board turnover, for instance, one of the significant reasons why we have problems when we turn over a board is because there's no long-term plan for how we're going to do things. So someone can come onto the board and say, you know what, I'm going to start debating and arguing about this thing right here. And then all of a sudden it just disrupts the entire strategy. And I just believe we have to start doing that. And I don't want to dismiss it. And like I said, I'll pipe down at this point, but I'm going to continue talking about the fact that this conversation that's been had, I think, is probably one of the best budget conversations that we've had in the time that I've been watching and or interacting. So that's and don't worry, I won't pop back in.
Any further questions on the capital plan? Any last comments, questions, any requests from staff regarding the capital plan? Okay, given that, I'd like to shift over, what do we have left on time? I don't see the time. I'd like to shift over to discussions on the operational plan. Does anybody have any comments on the operational budget? Andy.
I would just like to say I do like the assumptions you build into the budget for, in essence, allowing a growth in membership, an improvement in some of our open space, invasive management, another person adding to invasive management, because I think that is kind of forward-looking. And we all know environment's a big thing, and I like to see that we're putting more resources as we ramp up. We're putting more resources, but we're putting more resources in what looks, at least to me, like a good way to add value, I guess. So I just want to thank you for that, because I like the stuff that I saw, especially in.
Team effort.
Any other questions on the operational budget? I do have one question. I want to reiterate the question I asked at the last meeting. So the question I asked was, going back over the last 4 years, we had a budget. We had several, obviously, with several budgets that all had a set number of predicted or budgeted number of amount of net assets, increase in net assets for each of those years. And I believe each of those years we beat budget for increase in assets. So did you have those figures?
I did not do that, so I'll have to do that for you.
Okay. Thanks. Any other operational questions? Any other questions on the budget itself, operational, capital, strategic? Any other questions, comments on the budget before we go on to the next topic? Karen.
Oh, yeah, I just want to, I want to call out the watershed management plan. Susan, based on comments from residents speak out and things like that, I would really like to make sure that the budget, that updating that watershed management plan is part of that budget.
I would turn that to the board and say if that's something that you want included, because I don't think it's in there this.
It's currently not.
Right.
Well, you guys have on page 14, under the assumptions, overview of capital budget and planning, Columbia Watershed Management Plan provides, I mean, you call it out, so I'm assuming you're funding it.
So was the question to have it updated or to fund the project in it?
1-6. I'm concerned that the watershed management plan is completely out of date and hasn't been reviewed. And I want to fund a real watershed management plan. I don't want to fund an outdated plan. That's what I'm asking.
It's just referenced as it's a tool that we use as staff to inform project selections throughout the community. So it's not that the plan is funded, it's just one of the reference points that we have for guiding our decisions.
I don't think it should be a reference point if it's out of date.
So,
Mr. Chairman.
I do have one question on the watershed management plan. Is that actually a capital expense or is it operational expense? It's just a plan.
It'd be operating.
So I think
That'd be an operating expense, wouldn't it?
Well, what are you asking for? Developing a watershed management plan?
Yeah, if we were to, I'm not going to say develop, update the existing plan.
That would be an operational
That'd be an operational expense.
Correct.
So it wouldn't appear in the capital budget anyway. It would be part of the operations.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask that if a board member wants something that we discuss as a board, take a vote, and then provide direction to staff rather than individually directing staff to do individual things. That would be the best way to work as a team here.
Duly noted, except I don't believe there's a line item in operational plans for this, so that would be something that staff just does. Is that fair? And we wouldn't.
Is it the direction of the board or is it the direction of?
A board member.
No, I mean, from a staff perspective, staff, does this budget, the way it's proposed, allow you to develop a watershed management plan as part of operations?
It is currently not funded.
It's currently not funded. So we would need to take a vote to fund it.
Well, I was trying to figure out.
I thought that we already had.
We would need an estimate. We don't need an estimate for funding that.
Yeah, my question is, I thought that we had already voted on this. When we first talked about the budget, when we first came up with our strategic objectives, that was used as an example of something that we wanted to see funded, and so it's been talked about. I thought we had already taken a vote about it.
So there's been no votes on the budget yet. So every budget discussion has been so far discussion, so there's been no formal votes taken on anything budget-related this year. But if we do want to vote to include it, I believe we'd need to figure out how much we would need to allocate to the operational budget to increase that to support it. Susan?
So could I just, I think that we had a misunderstanding of what fund the watershed management plan means. So we interpreted that to fund the plan, meaning the projects in the plan. Not to fund a redo of the plan. So that was just that's a misunderstanding then, and a miscommunication on our part.
So I'll just get a sense of the board. Who here is in favor of basically asking staff to come up with a cost for developing an update to the watershed management plan? All in favor? I see 1, 2, 3, everyone opposed? 1, 2. I believe that there's a sufficient interest from the board to at least figure out what the cost of developing the watershed management plan is.
My big concern here, Eric, is that it's outdated, that it hasn't been updated, and we're making decisions based on that. So that makes me wonder about the rest of the budget.
So right now we're discussing the watershed management plan. And I believe the best approach is figure out how much it would cost and then take a vote at the appropriate time to include it in the budget as part of the operational budget.
Thank you.
Keith?
Yeah, I think like this conversation that's happening here is what I would be expecting to happen regarding the strategic outlook, because I agree with Susan in the fact that there was some miscommunication and misunderstanding in terms of what the board needed, and that comes from discussion about strategic priorities versus line items. So I do believe we have to go back and talk about are we funding what we expect to have happen. We wanted in here to have plans associated with all of these major components. So
thanks. Any other comments on the budget? Going once, going twice? In that case, we will move on to the next item, the Village Community Association overview.
Jackie?
Jackie?
That is it, yep. Good evening. Each year, we present an overview of the village community associations. CA provides a significant amount of funding to support the villages, and as stewards of the annual charge, it's important to understand that relationship, both from a governance and a financial perspective. So I will begin with a brief overview of governance, and then discuss the funding framework, and finally, we will go over some village-related financial results, trends, and metrics, largely from a big picture, holistic perspective. I will mention that I am part of a team at CA that works with the villages. My piece is the village's financial reporting requirements, audit reporting requirements. So I may not be the right person for all of the questions, but I will make sure to get any answers that we can't get tonight back to you. This is informational. So there's no board action that's needed. And if it's okay with you, we can please hold questions until after I get through the slides.
No problem.
So village structure. The villages are separate residential community associations. They are independent, incorporated, nonprofit civic associations. They were formed to promote the common good and welfare of the residents and property owners of each village, and each village has its own unique articles of incorporation, bylaws, and covenants. So there are two areas of village operations, and I will quickly note that these functions within these areas are the foundation for the allocation of the annual charge share. So you'll hear these again in a little bit. The first area is mission focused. So the mission of the villages is enforcing covenants, fostering a sense of community through things such as special events and other resident services and communications, advocacy, etc., overseeing the village elections, and providing support to the boards of directors. And CA owns 24 neighborhood and community centers. I'm going to refer to those as the 24 buildings. So the second area of village operations surrounds management of those buildings. So that's generating revenue. The villages generate revenue through leasing space to a variety of organizations, individuals, groups, and have the ability and the intent is to also offer space at free and reduced rates to those groups. So when it comes to funding, there are also kind of a breakdown of two different types of funding. The first I refer to as direct and allocated financial reports. So these are actual dollars that are spent largely for the bulleted items on this list. So you might be most familiar with the first one, which is the annual charge share. That is a grant to each village, and that grant structure was decided and established decades ago.
In addition to that, that is one piece of that funding support. CA also pays the employer portion of the village's employee benefits, pays the real estate taxes and building insurance. Covenant enforcement is obviously a responsibility of the villages, but any legal fees associated with potential or actual litigation is paid for by CA. And CA also employs a covenant administrator who works closely with all of the covenant advisors at each village. CA pays for capital improvements to the buildings. CA pays for the repairs and maintenance of the buildings that are over a specific threshold, $1,000 per project for some villages and $2,000 for others. And then there are allocations of a fairly significant amount of administrative and marketing support that's provided. A couple kind of quick examples are the costs to administer those welfare and fringe benefit plans, the 401k plan, which is more complex since it's a multiple employer plan to include the villages, the audit fees associated with that annual audit of that multiple employer plan. There's broker fees associated with all of this, and there are similar costs that CA incurs for procuring general liability and other insurances. So the second type of support is in-kind services. And I'd say the most significant of those is the free use of the buildings. In other words, there is no rent paid by the villages to CA for operating the villages. The villages generate that revenue. The villages then keep that revenue to use at their discretion and for other, whatever they want to use it for. And so I would say that's kind of the largest component of in-kind support, but also CA maintains the grounds around all of the buildings, provides snow, trash, and debris removal, and provides special event support. So, here are some pictures of the CA team in action, providing some special event support at Oakland Mills, and picking up trash at, I believe, Amherst House and King's Contrivance. Above that, we've got a little bit of work being done at Historic Oakland, and over here, a statue installation at Slayton House in Wild Lake. So the management contract, there is a management contract that exists between CA and each village. These are essentially building use agreements that outline the responsibilities of each party. So as you can imagine, with operating the buildings, there are a lot of parameters that have to be defined, having to do with insurance requirements, operating hours, maintenance responsibilities, inspections that are required, the financial reporting, the financial audits that need to be taken care of. So all of that is outlined in the management contracts, and the vast majority of those contracts are identical for each village. There are a few unique terms for some villages regarding water, sewer, and gas usage, and then, as I mentioned, the threshold for repairs and maintenance that are the village's responsibility versus CA's responsibility is $1,000 versus $2,000 for others, but other than that, those are kind of minor parts. The vast majority are identical among all of the villages. And the current management contract had a 6-year term, which would be scheduled to expire at the end of this year, but that is being extended one more year. And then there will be a new management contract and a negotiation process before that time. All right, the annual charge share. So I want to mention a few things about the annual charge share. I think this is important before we move into the last part of the graphs and some of the numbers and financial results. So the annual charge share to the village in total is approved by the board every year through the budget process. In FY23, I think it was approximately, don't hold me to this, about 3.2 million. So let's use that 3.2 million for a moment. So that is intended to cover all of the village's mission-focused functions. Remember, we talked about that includes employment of a village manager, covenant advisors, covering special events and services for residents, communications, and the operational and business expenses that are associated with handling those functions. Also included in that annual charge share is what we refer to as a facility share, and that is meant to subsidize and help cover those cases where free or reduced rates are being offered to residents, to civic groups. That's, at the discretion of each village. So the challenge becomes, how does that $3.2 million get allocated to each village? If every village had the same exact type of building to manage, the same exact population and the same exact number of properties to provide covenant enforcement to, it would be easy, right? 3.2 million divided by 10. But that is not the case, and so about 6 years ago, there was a cross-functional team of village managers as well as CA team members that worked together to develop a methodology of how to take that 3.2 or whatever that amount is every year and make sure that based on that population, number of properties, et cetera, that each village has what they need in order to operate and to fully fund those mission-specific functions, along with the subsidy for renting out the buildings at reduced rates. So the other piece to the puzzle is making sure that the villages have what they need to operate, and also to have enough reserves for any upcoming expenses and possibly emergency or unanticipated needs. And at the end of each year, there is a calculation, this is specified in the management contract, there's a calculation to determine if there is any cash beyond those needs, and if so, that is returned to CA. But that is excess of what is needed immediately, as well as a sufficient amount of reserves for unanticipated or emergencies, and that's why that is referred to as the excess cash reserves calculation. It's not returning the reserves, it's keeping reserves and returning funds beyond that. I think it's fair to say that any excess cash that comes back goes towards funding and supporting, the other areas that are provided by CA to the villages, and certainly as well as the community at large. So, if we think about CA has debt to repay, we incurred debt during the pandemic, for example, and so that fiscal responsibility for that entire pot of the annual charge revenue comes to play through this kind of balancing act of sorts of, here's the 3.2, let's see where we're going to allocate it based on this methodology, and then do this calculation at the end. So I feel like it's a little confusing when you hear it for the first time, and I wanted to kind of to spell that out slowly. So the formula, as I said, I think I covered this slide, that it was developed about 6 years ago, and the current methodology, so when we talk about the methodology, we're talking about how is the total approved by the board allocated to that 10 villages, has been in effect since FY19. So let's look at some numbers. These come right from the financial reports. This is on a GAAP basis. And if you look at the pie is the total annual charge in FY23 of $46.2 million, the amount that went to the villages. And remember, I was talking about 3.2, so 5.9 is the total of all of those other funding sources that we talked about, employee benefits, covenant, legal fees, et cetera. Came to 5.9 million, or 13% of the total annual charge. That is about third in line if you look at pieces of the pie behind community operations as the number one use of the annual charge, and then community programs and services, and third would be the villages at 13%. So that 5.9 we just talked about is right here, FY23. And you can just see, generally speaking, that we're fairly consistent over time, a 10-year history of total funding. I want to make mention, too, that there is an attachment in your packet that breaks this down from FY19 through FY24 current estimate, if you want to see each component that gets to these totals in this chart. So we had a crazy few years, and it did impact financials in some ways as far as the funding to the villages goes. The primary way would be that from FY20 to FY22, there were amendments made to the management contract or resolutions that were passed by the board that enabled the villages to retain extra cash reserves. So put aside the excess cash reserves calculation and say we are going to allow for more, and that was really due to uncertainties of the impact to the villages. Nobody knew what was going to happen next, and just to make sure that the villages had what they needed and then some. So the villages certainly experienced reduced operations during that time. In the end, each year, there was really a very minimal reduction of the annual charge share that went to the villages. The villages certainly experienced reductions in their revenue with respect to leasing and renting the buildings and being able to provide special events and things like that. But the piece that came from CA in the end, there was a 2% decline in FY21, which was kind of the big year that things were shut down. But other than that, it was quite steady. There was, however, limited capital and operating spending by CA for those buildings. And then last year, as well as this year, budgeted increases of the annual charge over prior years and a return to customary capital and operating spending by CA. So there's a few things here that I want to briefly talk about, and I will also just say that this is all the villages in total, but again, for those that like to dig into the details, each of these pieces are broken out in your packet by village if you want to look at that detail. So in the upper left here, we have the excess cash reserves, and simply stated, had there been no COVID and no kind of exceptions to allow the villages to keep extra cash, starting in FY19 and going through FY23, here's that excess cash that would have come back to CA. The orange line, due to those resolutions and amendments, is what was actually paid back. And so you can see the starting point in FY19, pre-COVID, no exceptions, it would, they're the one and the same. Going down here to the cash position, at the end of each fiscal year, and I'm not sure why this is FY19, 20, 21, 22, 23, can't see the bottom there, but this is just simply total cash that are in the banks at the end of each fiscal year. But then there are bills to pay, and there are commitments, and there's cash in the bank that is security deposits or deferred revenue or the annual charge that was paid in advance. So if you take all of that away and get to what is there that is actually more of a reserve that's in the bank, you can see that with these orange pieces here. And I think one of the key takeaways is that if you compare pre-COVID to post-COVID, I feel like we're at the first point that we can really say, what did FY19 look like compared to FY23? FY23 total cash and cash reserves are higher than the FY19. So that's reassuring. And then over here, a couple things. In total, 44% of the village's total revenue is generated by the village. Some of them, in addition to renting the building, have fairly robust newsletter ad revenue or charge a fair amount for special events. So that all factors in there as well. Obviously, renting and leasing building space is the highest component, but taking away the annual charge share, about 44%. But you can see the range here is significant. I mean, it's 19, I don't know, 19 to 60 some percent, an average of, thank you, 63. Where are my glasses? So, it's 44%, but it varies village by village for sure. So working capital. So that's a good financial metric to measure whether an organization has readily available the funds to pay what they owe over the next year. That's a great way to kind of convert, okay, there's this cash, what does it all mean? And it's really kind of taking a simple formula of current assets divided by current liabilities. And you really want to see a number of at least one. So if you have current liabilities that exceed current assets, there could be a liquidity problem. On the flip side, if that number is too high, that's not necessarily good either, especially, for example, for a nonprofit, which we should be financially prudent and generate a profit, but the purpose of a nonprofit is not to accumulate wealth. So what that right number should be, it depends on a lot of things, the business, the industry, and really the stability of its revenue streams of a organization's revenue stream. So what's fortunate for the villages is that the largest revenue stream to conduct their business, their mission-focused business, is provided by CA and has proven to be very, very stable, unlike, for example, a nonprofit 501c3 that is dependent on individual donations. That is a less stable source of revenue and might warrant a higher working capital, but in my opinion, 1.8 on average, ranging from 1.6 to 2.1 is good. I will also say the 1.8 average is a little bit higher than it was pre-COVID. That was 1.6. And this is an apples to oranges comparison, but I thought I might be asked. CA at the end of FY23 was 1.2. So then if you take total cash, that's these last two metrics, and say, well, what does that equate to as far as the number of months of expenses that are on hand that could be paid for? 6.9 on average. But if you go down to the cash reserves, so if all funding stopped, CA stopped giving any money, there was no other revenue generated, and all the bills stayed the same, all the payments, which would not happen, there would be on average 3 months worth of cash reserves to pay those bills. The equivalent of that for CA for its cash reserves is 1.4 months. So I have a couple last slides, and they are focusing on just building generated revenue. So lease and rental for using the buildings. I just put together some things that I thought, would be interesting. So this somewhat equalizes and compares among the villages because it's taking the total building generated revenue, leases and rentals, divided by total square feet that each of the villages has for rent. And you can see that it varies greatly. So what's important here is to not draw conclusions that this is an indication of how well a village operates or how effective a village is, any particular village is in managing its buildings, because as you know, each of the buildings has something different to offer. So a wedding at Historic Oakland is going to command a different rate and generate different revenue than a small meeting room in a neighborhood center. The villages all have different business models. They have different clientele. And it's at each village's discretion as to how much free and reduced space they want to offer, which obviously would affect these. So I think it's interesting, but what it's really showing us is how the uniqueness is of each village with respect to managing these buildings. And then the last slide that I have, because I do love comparing pre and post-COVID things that are going on, is what does the revenue for each village for managing the buildings? Again, I'm taking out the CA funding because that stayed constant throughout. But what did the revenue from generated from renting the buildings look like in FY23 versus FY19, a full year before COVID? So for example, this is the delta. Dan, what's this number here?
33.
Thank you. Dorsey Search generated 33% more revenue in FY23 than it did in FY19. And then you can see, for example, Hickory Ridge, it was less.
Negative 16.
By 16%, and so on. So similar to the previous slide, the buildings were affected and the villages were affected differently. If you are a village that primarily has small rooms that were used for, neighborhood gatherings or meetings, they may be largely virtual now in this new world. Nobody's having a virtual wedding that they would have at Historic Oakland. So again, all of that has to be taken into consideration, and I just found this interesting. So the detailed attachments are there, and if you go through them and have any questions, please let me know. And does anyone have any questions?
So I will open up to the board for questions. Does anybody have any questions on the presentation or village funding? Ellen.
Well, first of all, Jackie, thank you so much. There's a lot of good information, and I appreciate the comparisons. I guess my question is really for Dennis. Did I miss something, or is this the first time the board has been informed about the extension of the management contract?
So I don't know that the board was informed of the extension, and it's not something that we would not inform the board of, but it's also an operational issue. It's not the president signs the contract, the president negotiates with or works with the villages. It's not something that we purposefully withheld, but it's also not something that would be part of the normal conversation.
Well, except I thought that in the past, we had been involved. Back in 19, we were involved, and I thought we actually, as a board, approved the contract.
That was the allocation, methodology, not the contract.
Yep.
Okay. We are involved in the approval of this thing, and I guess whether or not we could quibble about whether that means we're involved or not. I would just say for myself, this is the kind of thing that I would have liked to be given a heads up for, and not hear about it from the village. I would have liked to have been ahead of it for them.
But I do want to clarify, the allocation methodology is part of the contract.
Right.
So when we vote on it's not?
No.
No.
No, it's not. Okay, sorry. Any other questions on the villages? Seeing that, I do have one question myself. So I'm looking at attachment A, and looking at the annual charge share in FY19, it was 3.2 million, and the FY24 estimate's 3.3 million. I look at the total annual charge share, the bottom number is in FY19, it's 6.4 million. Now it's 6.2 million. So basically what I'm seeing over time is, and our annual charge grows by about 3% or so every year. So I'm looking at these numbers, and I see the amount of support that's going to the villages as a percentage of our annual charge getting smaller and smaller and smaller each year. And inflation is certainly an issue, certainly over the last couple of years. So the question I have is, given that the amount of money has been static, are our villages doing okay? Are they getting squeezed by the current economy that they're getting the same amount of annual charge dollars, yet inflation's been going up significantly over the past 5 years?
So as far as the squeeze goes, we're all feeling the squeeze. So our revenue does not keep pace with inflation, personnel costs, cost of supplies. And so each of our organizations has to work on managing expenses to revenues at CA. We take a close look at capital expenditures and operating as well. And I'm sure the villages have been doing the same. As far as looking at this as a trend in Schedule A, you just have to be careful that, first of all, it does include employee benefits, which vary depending on how many employees are eligible or are taking benefits. That is a piece of this. But also, and bigger than that, is that there is that original amount that's given out, 3.2, for example, and then any excess that comes back is a reduction of that amount. So this is really the net of what was paid back that's reflected. So this is straight out of the financial reports, and that's important because the way the funding worked versus how the operations were during COVID caused some payments back at unprecedented levels that are making these numbers kind of net to a lower amount.
So I guess I'll just reiterate my question. Are the amount of money the amount of support going to our villages, is that keeping up with inflation? Susan?
I believe that it is, and if you'll see here, there are a couple other things that happened in FY19 and 20. There was an allocation of $42,000 and $43,000 of administrative costs. It's no longer happening, so that increased those years, and that expense is no longer necessary, and the villages aren't being burdened by that, by CA. And also in FY19, there was a significant legal fees. I think there was some pretty bad cases in that year that also caused that. So, and then CA is providing that. That's dollars right out of CA's funding as well. So if you're looking at the total, that there are some things that aren't quite apples to apples year over year.
Also, repairs and maintenance, I think, is another good example of that fluctuation.
And I think that you can tell too by looking at the balance sheet, the health of the balance sheets of the villages, and they're quite strong, as you could see from the cash positions and the working capital ratios and all those things. So we have, it seems that the villages are doing pretty well.
I'd just like to suggest that we should ask the villages how they're doing as far as being squeezed. It would be great feedback to get input from them.
I agree. I think that'd be a good question to ask all the village managers.
It would be far more than what we could get from the balance sheet.
I think that'd be a great thing to ask if we can just ask that, send that question out to the village managers and get their opinion on the budget. Sky?
Wouldn't that be answered at the end of the fiscal year by how much excess they have in return?
That's a great indicator. Because the villages are largely cash businesses, unlike CA with all of the debt repayments and the significant amounts of depreciation. So you can really use those cash-related metrics pretty heavily. Yeah.
Keith? And I don't know, don't we all have a sense for how our village is doing? I go to 4 meetings a month, and 2 of those are the village, and I hear about the budgets and the things that we're doing, so I'm just...
Yeah. I'm not getting a sense of how my village is doing. I don't get a sense of how all your other villages are doing.
Right, but I'm just saying, instead of necessarily going back, I think we have a general sense of how our villages, each of our villages, unless someone doesn't have that perspective, but
it'd be nice if we could aggregate it all.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this won't give the village managers opinions, but take a look at that if you want in your free time. That is essentially profit and loss statement for each village side by side as of FY23. It's in your packet. It's a lot of numbers.
One thing I'll say is, one thing these numbers won't say is are there functions that the village has had to give up or not able to do as a result of things getting more expensive. So these numbers won't be able to show that, but the village managers giving some, their opinions might be able to enlighten us on that.
Well, the answer to that is yes. I can tell you that.
We wish we had more also.
Yeah.
And could do more.
Everyone's doing that, I think.
Yep. Yep.
Any other questions on the villages? Okay, that brings us to reports.
Hey, Jackie.
So do we have any questions on the update on board action items, pre-filed county legislation, or the chair guidebook? So questions only phase. Any questions? Alan?
Are we, regarding Terry Hill's proposed bill, has there been any contact with her at the CA level?
We're going to meet with her for an informational session on Monday.
Thank you.
Do you have a general sense of what that bill does and what the...
No.
Okay.
No. Find out on Monday.
Okay.
5 times and come up with 5 different answers.
Yes.
I just picked the answer I liked. Any other questions? Seeing no questions, proposed new topics. Any proposed new topics we want to add or consider? Going once, going twice. No proposed new topics.
Just a quick, we've got a board ops meeting coming up next week, so if you think of one in between now and then, come on down.
Yeah, please
visit with us.
Please
we'll have a good time.
And let us know ahead of time.
And it's on a different day than we usually have them.
Yes,
on a
it's a Wednesday. And keep in mind, that actually coincides with another meeting. Yep. So back-to-back meetings there. Do you have a comment?
I did have a general comment that I'd like to make. So we've been talking for a couple weeks now about the Sewell's Orchard Pond. And that was, as the president and CEO, after meeting with my team and having conversations with my team, I made that decision, and based on the facts. The fact is that increase in water is forever. The fact is that the disturbance to that area is temporary. The disturbance to the wildlife is temporary. Trying to calculate the carbon footprint of something, of where a truck comes from, how far it goes, is really not possible. And if I accept 1% here, do I accept 1% there? And does 1% sometime turn into 25%? So I stand by the decision I made. It was my decision after consulting with my team members. It was the right decision. I would do the same thing again today. It's forever. And the last thing I'd say is the work that's being done there is not predicated based on that increased runoff. There was work that had to be done that was significant. And an ancillary piece of that might have been that CA might have taken additional water that should really be contained at the source, which we've been talking about in the stream restoration discussion forever. And the one time I get that chance to do so, we decide, well, maybe I'll take 1% more here. But I didn't, and I would do the same thing again. Thank you.
Thank you. So that leaves us with chair remarks. I'd like to thank everybody for participating tonight. And so the interesting thing about usually November, December is usually a fairly easy set of months because we just have one meeting and then holidays and one meeting again then holidays. But this is actually going to be a fairly busy pair of months for this board as we look at the presidential search, as we look at developing the next strategic plan. So it's going to be a lot of work for us. And I look forward to working with everyone on the board to make those things happen. So thank you. Given that, can I get a motion to adjourn? Motion by Keith. Is there a second?
Yes.
Second by Karen. Any objections to adjourning? Seeing no, the meeting is adjourned at 9:20.
I'll take it.